Good morning to everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time zone you are online. I hope this camera can pivot. See, everyone in the building sits in the back, so I just keep moving further up front to get that personal connect and cause feedback. Sorry, Solomon, I'm complicating your life. Yeah. This series that we're in right now is Mended, yeah? And that's following on the Broken series. And they're kind of brother and sister. And isn't that true? Throughout life and our journey, it's somehow we need to get broken to be properly mended. So it's a cool connect. And what we're really tracking a lot here is through Acts. And what does Acts tell us about? It's telling us about the early church, the very first Christians, even before they really would have been called Christians or seen as anything other than a different group of Jews. Yeah? And what do we know about, we've been covering over the last few weeks, we know there was the original set of disciples that were completely thrown for a loop with Jesus' crucifixion. The story had not gone according to the plan that they had expected, and they were distraught and confused, and frankly right there on the edge of throwing in the towel and just going back to fishing. And then what we saw through Road of Emmaus and Jesus appearing to the disciples was re-energizing, a reconvincing, a recommitment, a belief and a trust that what we were after was in fact true. The thing wasn't a pipe dream that has ended, but we believe this enough to completely change our lives and what we're going to do. And instead of going back fishing, we're off to Jerusalem. And then we know that these guys couldn't be stopped from preaching this good news, preaching about God's love as it was manifest through Jesus. And numbers started growing. They upset some of the Jewish authorities. They were healing people. They started to form a community that was so fired up about this thing that they just grouped all their stuff together and shared their stuff and made sure all the needs were covered. Yeah? This is a quick run through to Acts 6 where we are today. And what we know from the start of the passage is this thing was growing. There was a real energy around what was being preached and how it was being received, and people were joining this movement. And I think we know very well that when things are going super well, especially in a God-ordained thing, what is the enemy's first focus or priority? Right? It's to plant some little seeds of conflict within that community, to try and create division. This good thing cannot keep happening. We need to find a way to mess up this party, right? And so when we read in this passage, there's a few things that are just kind of breezed over that I think it's very important that we take note of. And if you wouldn't mind, you can keep like the first few verses up there, whatever fits on that first. Well, we see it's a growing community, one. And we see that immediately there's a couple groups that are mentioned very quickly in passing, right? Hellenistic Jews and Hebraic Jews. And notice these are all Jews, right? At this time, there weren't Greek non-Jew converts to Christianity. As I mentioned, Christianity would have felt and just be seen as a continuity of Judaism. The Messiah came and fulfilled those prophecies. We are proper Jews, yeah? And so the only people who are here in this community, as far as we can tell, are Jews. Now, what are Hellenistic Jews? What are Hebraic Jews? As you guys probably know, throughout the history of the Jewish kingdom, of the Jewish empire, there were different stages when Babylon or others dominated over the Jewish empire, and so the Jews were sent historically throughout the world, the world to them. Not many made it to India, But some would have made it to India. Probably not many made it to US. But there was a diaspora of Jewish people that then got a little more accustomed to living in a foreign environment instead of an intensely traditional Jewish environment with all the culture and the language and the food and the traditions, and they would have had probably different favorite bands that they listened to on the radio and everything, because they were growing up in a different culture and community, but they were still Jews. And this doesn't mean that they didn't believe or even practice the rituals from back at home, but maybe the same way that you guys would see an Indian kid who was born in the US and grew up his own life and came back to visit, he's not really a true Indian, right? Not the authentic, real McCoy like us who live here. And so those were like the Hellenistic Jews. And it has to be said, we know how we are as humans, right? And it has to be said that you can imagine this little snarky undertone from the Hebraic Jews of like, yeah, nice try. You're not the authentic thing. You're not the real. Let's hear your Aramaic. Let's hear your Hebrew. You sound a little more comfortable in Greek, right? And so a lot of this subtext would have been there. It's just how we look down at each other for whatever reason. We're amazing. We're so capable of this as humans, right? It's probably likely that even in Jerusalem, the Hellenistic Jews probably would have hung out with Hellenistic Jews and the Hebraic Jews with Hebraic Jews, as we tend to do. We kind of find our people that have enough in common, and we hang out with each other. So what's notable about this new community is that these folks were hanging out together. They were in the same community, and probably that was creating some little joys and tensions along the way as they figured that out, right? And what we notice then here is there is a complaint, right? And it's a complaint that somehow there's a bias that's creeping in. And the Hellenistic widows are not being treated fairly or as well as the Hebraic widows, right? Leave it to the aunties to get things stirred up, right? And I'm sure they didn't say it themselves. They would have told someone else, hey, did you notice this? And got maybe the crew, the Hellenists, a little riled up and all that. It could be that this was an actual problem. It could be that it was a perceived bias, but not a real problem, right? We don't know. But the perception was certainly there, and the complaint or the observation was raised. And so it's important to notice that. It's important to stop and notice right here from the start as well, and not breeze over it too quickly, that there was a program to serve the widows, right? This group carried on, and this wasn't new to this new Christian community. This was a Jewish tradition. You see it throughout Scripture in the Old Testament, how God is constantly telling his people, take care of the widows, the orphans, the foreigners, the most vulnerable, right? And we see in Deuteronomy 10, right? Deuteronomy, which is the old Hebrew translation for the study of the dude, yeah, Deuteronomy. And so basically all kinds of truth in this book. Here's an example. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no brides. He defends who? To what we read a few weeks ago now in Genesis, summing up the start of everything. Have faith in God, trust God, take care of each other, right? And the most difficult to be taken care of would have been these folks. Why? Because we know in this kind of patriarchal society, unless you're an adult male, you're frankly a second-class citizen. You're not really a person until you become an adult. And when you become an adult, if you're a woman, you move from being attached to your father to being attached to a husband. Yeah? And so anyone who's an orphan doesn't have that male attachment figure to make them a full person. And if you're an adult woman, if you're a widow and you don't have a husband, you're also kind of lost at sea. And this was just the cultural reality of the time. And so this is God saying, these people who don't have that support network, you really need to look out for them. And so this tradition was going on, and I think what's very important to see is that it's so important that it's not going on in a haphazard way. There is a system. They have set up a program, the daily distribution of the food, right? To which there's a complaint about how the system is working. So hats off to them for taking this so seriously as to embed it. They believed it, and they trusted that by providing for these people, it was the best thing to do because God told them to do it. Yeah? You guys with me so far here? Okay, now the system apparently wasn't working as well as it could have. Apparently there was some bias in the distribution. Apparently the advanced technology of the buffet was not available to this community where people could just serve themselves whatever they wanted. But eventually this will come about, and even if you notice on our community lunches, we have cracked this problem by the use of the buffet. Thank you very much, Wellspring. So the thing I want to recognize here is what happens is the leaders of this thing, they're kind of the guilty party, because it looks like the head honchos, the disciples, the apostles, were the ones that were carrying this out, in addition to being the ones that were sharing the gospel, the good word, out to the broader community, preaching the gospel. And what do? They don't get defensive. They don't say, you've got a silly bias, we're treating everyone well. What do? They hear this. They accept it. And they think about, how can we solve this problem? And how can we get more of us involved to help solve the problem? How can we identify people amongst us that have a stronger gift than we do to address this issue? Because apparently our gifts don't lie in this area. And so they are working to propose that they respond to this complaint. And who do they select? What kind of people? What is the requests? What is the CV they're looking for here? It's people that are full of the Spirit and that are wise, right? They don't go to the caterers in the group, the chefs, the food people, right? Because this is not a food issue. Like so many things, there's a root cause issue. And what are people that are full of the Spirit? What is the fruit of the Spirit? Do we know? Galatians 5, right? What is the fruit of the Spirit? Anyone want to throw out some suggestions? Right? We got it there? None of that has exactly anything to do with food. Yeah? It has to do with the people. Because it always, with God, comes back to the people. Interestingly enough, it is uncanny how important food is throughout all the scriptures. Just dance through time quickly and look at it. The fall, eating the fruit. Right? Exodus, wah, 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 we got freed, what do we eat? Okay, manna. Right? What happens with Jesus? He feeds the 5,000. And it's the disciples themselves that are complaining, what are we going to eat? And feeding that 5,000 communicates a much broader message about the gospel than just food alone does. And when he wants to have his going away party, he organizes a final supper to really embody what he's about and the sacrifice is about. And we celebrate that supper. And we continue to eat to understand God, right? And there is this sense, if you guys, interesting kind of rabbit hole for you to dive into and you want to go search it up, is this concept of embodied cognition, right? Very funky word, very fancy word. But traditional cognition, people are thinking that, you know, the mind is basically a computer that works and computes and thinks things on its own. But this embodied cognition is the concept that it's very Jewish actually, compared with like Hellenistic thinking, which is dualistic, the physical and the spiritual. Whereas Hebraic thinking is much more integrated between the physical reality and the spiritual reality. And that's the tradition we live, right? So cognitive embodiment is the idea that, or embodied cognition is the idea that your thinking is inextricably intertwined with your body and the physical stuff and what you're doing. So you can research that. It's too big of a rat hole to get into, or rabbit hole to get into today. But this is the kind of thing here that you're seeing this consistency with the use of food throughout the whole story of the scripture, and very profound concepts. Trusting in God, receiving God, trusting in each other, caring for each other, embodying Jesus Christ in how we live. And so again, food rears its head here as an important marker of how this community is responding to much more profound issues than snacks. Much more profound issues. It is about how we live with each other, how we honor and love each other, how we take extra pain to make sure that there's not bias and there's not even a perception of bias. What else is notable about these 7 dudes that we elect to take on the cause? Do you notice their names? Stephen, awesome name, right? Yeah. All of those names, you can put it up. Yeah, look at these names. These are fine, upstanding Greek names. Not a Hebrew name to be found. No proper John, no Saul, no Jeremiah. Like, give me David at least, right? I want a good Hebrew name in this bunch, not a one. And in fact, they even go the extra mile to push the limits. They even call out and flag that we have a dude who's not even an original Jew. He's a convert to Judaism. So if you're talking down your nose at the Hellenistic Jews, look at this rascal. He's not even an OG. He's not an original OJ, original Jew. Yeah? He's a convert to Judaism. Again, not a convert to Christianity, a convert to Judaism. It underscores that point. This was just seen as another sect or subset of Judaism. But you see the intentionality here. Okay, if this seems to be the problem, we'll put all of those people in charge. All of them. And we'll have faith that they don't exact any revenge on the Hebraic widows. We trust that that group will be able to do this fairly to everyone's satisfaction. Pretty cool, huh? And what was the result of this? The result was that the community continued to grow even more, as we see at the end of the original text in that last verse 7, yeah? So the word of God spread, and the numbers of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests came obedient to the faith. And so this was a moment of potential division and conflict and crisis. But it was turned into a magical opportunity and a moment for mending, a moment for supercharging this community, for empowering individuals who may have not been even treated, maybe just felt like they weren't quite worthy. And they were elevated into positions that were important to make the community function. Notice also the balance here between addressing the growing internal needs of this community while also prioritizing the outward facing. They were not going to keep the guys from going out to preach the word in order to resolve this problem. That is a non-negotiable. We're going out. We'll find a way to solve this. It's also important. But we're not going to neglect the outreach. Very important that they balance this. That led to that ongoing growth. Now I want to pause for a second on growth, because I know that even amongst ourselves, we've had good discussions about growth. here at Wellspring. And I would say there's probably very few of us who are kind of regulars in this community who are yearning for Wellspring to become a megachurch. Am I right? Or is there any closeted megachurch coveters out there? Anyone really just hoping that we end up meeting in some stadium and have a super slick pastor who's like got it all together supposedly, but really hides bad things like all the megachurch stuff? Okay. I don't think there's many of us here, if anyone, and after all that, they certainly won't mention now. But at the same time, on the other side, I think there are some of us that fear growth. We don't want this. We don't want to be obsessed with growth, and we don't want it to become so big that we can't be tight and take care of each other. Am I right? I think it's a valid fear. But I want to challenge that growth is a natural part of life. We grow and grow and grow, and that's when we're at our healthiest. And then when you get to my age, you stop growing and you start dying slowly, right? But growth is a dynamic feature that injects life into a community. And it's not that everyone has to stay and the place has to become a megachurch, but you should keep growing. And you should keep up with that growth by sending people out to places in the world where it's needed, but we should not be afraid of growth. This movement was fueled by that growth. And we see how critical of a piece it was. And if you think about this progression of how we journey through our faith, and frankly, this is a generic process. It could be faith as we see it in God and in the Christian context. You can apply this basically to any concept. I'm sorry I didn't make a slide, but if you want to chart this out on your notes here, there's a first order of belief, which is just understanding a concept, hearing the concept, and either rejecting that or saying, okay, that makes sense. There's a lot of things that just to us are foolishness and we toss it out. Yeah? There's a whole subset of the world, if you try and push the concept of socialism as the ideal economic model, they'll just say, hogwash. I don't want any part of that. Then you come to a level where you accept that concept. That, I can buy into that. That, in theory, is correct. Yeah, that's like second stage. Third stage is you buy into that concept so much that you start to actually do things differently. And it changes your behavior. And then there's the final level of faith, or buy-in, or however you want to think about it, which is you bet everything on that concept. You reorient around that concept. You trust what's there in that concept, right? Now, if you think about these 4 stages, Jesus wonderfully mapped them out for us. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Jesus talked about a dude sowing seeds and where those seeds fell. And some seeds fell on the side of the road and were snatched up immediately by the birds. That concept never landed. Immediate rejection of the concept. Others fell on the rocky side of the road, and it took root, but weak roots. So there was some buy-in. Conceptually, this sounds kind of nice. But under a little bit of scrutiny and heat and stress, didn't pass the stress test, abandoned. Then there were seeds that fell in good soil, but amongst thorns. He talks about that's people who really do believe this and start to live differently. But then what happens? Worries creep in. Desires creep in. The challenge, am I committed to this? Or does this put at risk my fears or my desires? And those fears and desires ultimately choke out and don't let us get past an initial testing of this concept. And then finally, we have the seeds that fall in the good soil and take root, and they grow up. And what do? They don't just get big and strong, but they produce fruit. And that's the seed that is fully taking root, and that means that's that final level of trust and faith where you have reoriented your life around that concept. And I know that we all generally like to think of ourselves as those good soil seeds. The sad truth of the matter is most churches are filled with the group one up above. We're still hedging our bets. We're amongst the thorns. We're very much in the world. We have not yet reoriented our entire life around this belief that I can trust God with everything, dedicate myself to taking care of other people in God's name through whatever way gifts He's given me. The fact of the matter is most of us has bought more into that concept that if you work hard, you'll be okay. You'll have a good job, right amount of stuff, be able to take care of your family. That is the orientation for most of us, even Christians. And then we do find ways to work our Christianity, our faith, into that anchoring belief system. But if we're really honest with ourselves, the anchor isn't the trusting of God. This community reoriented their life. This community let these priorities that God has given to us from book one, day one, and they embedded it into a systemic response to God's love, to trust and create systems that carried out His will and our purpose. And mind you, I think sometimes we get very elevated about the church and thinking that the church should be this bubble of a model. And God's desire is that the church be holy and the church take care of others and the church be Christ-like. But the invitation at the start of time was to humanity. Humanity seen as complete equals. And so, yes, the church should be first and foremost a model of this if we believe this stuff. And we should be an example, but then our outward focus should not rest and be like, what a cool bubble. All of our widows are eating. We are called to be out in the world and to get outside of these walls and to feed the widows outside. Hellenistic, Hebraic, Indian, Mexican, Pakistani, Afghani, you name it. That's our world. That's our calling. And I want to share a testimony that I've had in terms of being a slave to these two masters. Most of you guys know I run a company called Vartana. We have like 600 employees. And then we're trying to serve people in the community. But there's a temptation. What am I judged on by the world? I'm judged on profit. I'm valued. It's literally the words. The company is valued based on its profits. Yeah? Now, when I manage 600 employees, how do I value them? Is it on their output? Am I okay destroying their family life if I can squeeze a little more business out of them to help company bottom line and make me look like a rock star? It's very tempting. And is what we're driven to do. All this AI revolution is let's get rid of those pesky humans. Right? We can do this more efficiently without them. Not needed to improve the bottom line. And that's not new. That's history of business and efficiency and maximizing returns. And I realized this year I was valuing the business more than the people. I didn't care how many kilometers that team had to drive, whether it was Monday or Saturday or Sunday. Just give me business, right? There's a funny T-shirt I like in the U.S. that, I don't know if you guys had it here, but it has like that skull and crossbones from the Pirates. And it says, the beatings will continue until morale improves, right? And this was kind of my, like, okay, let's do business. If you're not going to do that, I'll kick your butts until I can squeeze extra business out of you. That's the end goal, the most important. Is that what I'm called to as a believer? If this job requires me to be that way, I should not be in this job as a believer. But do I trust God? Do I trust Him enough to stand up to investors and the world who's judging and say, we're going to prioritize the people, and we have faith that that will be best for the business and best for you as shareholders? I have faith that God will honor serving and helping and supporting the people. We compromise, right? We don't want to be seen as a religious fanatic. All this other stuff is so embraced by the world. It's what moves markets and wars and everything, is this logic of maximizing profit and what have you. This other stuff is crazy silliness. And it has its place, but it's not in the boardroom. And that has been what I have followed, in full confession. And this year, now starting, finally I had the conviction and the guts to say, we're doing it the wrong way. And so I had a team full of people that were focused on business. We've now created a team that are essentially, we don't call it that, but they're essentially pastors. We call them managers, to be a little covert, right? But these people' only job now is to take care of the people and to make sure that they're realizing their potential and doing their best. And yes, there's a business component to that. But if we got all the business targets and didn't hit this, all of this team would be rated poorly, because they're going to be rated on the individuals. And that structure is replicated throughout that thing. And I have a precious few people that are actually worried about business. And we'll find out how this all goes. I want to have faith. I want to trust God. I want to believe, but it sounds kind of crazy. And I'm hoping and praying that it works, and that like a year from now, I'll be able to come back here and be some role model of why you should step out in faith. Because you can check both of the boxes. But even if it's a disaster, I at least now will sleep a little better thinking that I'm responding in my role to this word as I should. And maybe God's fruits are different than my shareholders' fruits. I don't know. I'll take ownership. So my challenge for us as a community and as individuals is, can we not take more ownership as a Wellspring community about how we are failing in our outreach and our outward-facing value? It's one of our core values. And we have a lot of people that do an amazing job of setting up the internal stuff, the internal care, the tech, the worship. The preachers are okay. But we haven't systematized the outreach in a way that I believe is our call and is very clearly laid out, and it reflects a bias or a weakness that we might have to be more intentional about overcoming. So I want to challenge us as a community to take that on, and I would ask that anyone who has a heart for that, please approach me or anyone on any of the leadership team to put your hand up and say, I want to be a part of making that happen. And then I want to challenge all of us as individuals to reflect on these stages of trust and belief and reflect with God and wrestle with God. Are you amongst the thorns? Are you freely growing in good soil? Is the fruit that your life is producing fruit that aligns with this call from Scripture from the start of time? Are you guys okay to receive that challenge, to reflect on that? I'm going to come back and find a way to keep us accountable on the follow-through. But don't just push it off and nice Sunday, okay, let's get to samosas. Wrestle with this, chew on it. It's tough. It's tough. I super wrestled with this stuff at work. But I'm at peace with the response right now. But for a while, it was a lot of tension about the hypocrisy. In the end, I believe that God has shown throughout history that He honors this. And in Jesus, the results we know sometimes are surprising. And something that looks like the end of the world is the answer to all the world's problems.